Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Yeah. Welcome, dear friends, to Kardec Radio. We are here in our 10th anniversary. And thanks to Carlos, who just stopped by, I was reminded that my microphone was muted. You see, husbands are very helpful. And I remember day one, Carlos was there as well with us. Together, we were in this journey. And Dr. Schwartz came along. He came to inaugurate a new era. I'll never forget when he said it's not only the 4th of July, independence of the beloved United States of America, but it's our spiritual independence. And in the spirit of our spiritual independence that we are conquering each and every day, we are going to talk to him. Yes, he came back. After so many years, though, he came back a few times, and now more. And I want to share with you, if you want to, there's so much to know about his works. One of my preferred pages is at the University of Arizona. His page, Dr. Gary Schwartz page there, because it talks about his works, and that's what we want to know. It's about working on the field of understanding, for example, past life memories, Reiki, electromagnetic fields. We also have his beautiful studies on homeopathic approach. There's a few studies on this, and we in Spiritism, we appreciate homeopathy so much. Hahnemann is one of the spirits that really inspired the mediums at Kardec's time. And now I will bring back to you, we think he is the scientist of the future. For those who love science and appreciate it, we introduce to you Dr. Schwartz. Thank you so much for being here again, Dr. Schwartz.
Oh, it is such a privilege to be with you.
Thank you. You know, we've seen that in 2013, you published a paper with some friends in Brazil, Lucati's group, right?
Correct.
It's a beautiful collaboration. And I'm so happy to see that it turned out to be came out in a paper talking about past life memories. You have books as well that talks about so many studies with mediums. And I will begin from the end, and then we can go back to the beginning. Lately, what would you like to share with us, Dr. Schwartz, the latest news about your studies?
Wow. Well, it's very special that you invited me for this 10th anniversary, this independence, not just for the United States, but as you reminded me about independence of our spirituality and the bridging of our physical world with the greater reality, the greater spiritual reality. And as you know, one of the things we've been focusing on is work developing technology to make it possible to detect and communicate with, quote, spirit. We call it, quote, the soul phone.
Oh.
And we have a website called the soulphonefoundation.org, or just soulphone, SOULPHONE.org, which will take you to that website. And what we've been doing is we've been using state-of-the-art electromagnetic technology with special software that we've developed to make it possible to detect the presence of what we now refer to as post-material persons, as opposed to calling them spirits or souls or discarnates or entities. There are many different words.
Yeah.
The term post-material is one that's becoming more widely thought of, again, in the academic world.
Mm.
In fact, we created, I was one of the co-founders of what's called the Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences.
Oh, yeah.
The website is www.aapsglobal.com. And we've just now completed 2 edited books. I was a co-editor on both of these books. One is called Is Consciousness Primary? And another one is called Expanding Science, where various scientists here and abroad, including some of your colleagues from Brazil, have contributed work that points in this emerging direction. But the thing that I'm most devoted to and consumes most of my conscious energy is the soul phone technology.
Oh.
So, for example, I have a new paper that's coming out in the journal Explore, the Journal of Science and Healing, which is also the journal that you mentioned in that past life paper that I had the privilege to be a co-author. And this is describing a completely computer automated, multi-blinded, multi-center, randomized control trial.
Oh my gosh.
To document the presence of post-material participants, collaborators, and potential communication. And very briefly, just to show how sophisticated the science has become, with our team on the other side, we call them sometimes affectionately our test pilots. They in the research, they will meet with a particular medium, a laboratory research medium, such as actually my wife Rhonda has become very good at this, and then she will instruct a group of them on a given night to show up at one of 2 laboratories. So the laboratory is either at the University of Arizona, for example, and another one, let's say, is in Ohio, which is where we have a laboratory satellite laboratory. Okay, and these 2 laboratories are collecting data all night. So the research is run in the middle of the night when no one is physically present. No one in the physical is physically present. And all of the instructions and all of the data collection is done by computer. So the computer speaks, the computer puts slides up, and then explains to our team whose turn it is to participate with the equipment and who is then going to collect data. We have 4 members of our spirit team, our PMPs, and each of them participate in the experiment 4 times. So we collect 16 sessions of data in a single night. Now, I, for example, am responsible for maintaining the equipment at the University of Arizona site. And my colleague, Dr. Mark Pitstick, he is responsible for maintaining the equipment in Ohio. However, neither one of us know which laboratory our PMPs are going to on a given night. We are code blind. So we don't know on a given night whether the team is going to be coming to our laboratory or will be going to the other laboratory. So if they're going to the University of Arizona, it means that the Ohio laboratory is collecting control data. It's like a placebo. And if they go to the Ohio laboratory, then the University of Arizona laboratory is collecting data as a quote placebo. And we run 24 nights of this very sophisticated experiment, collecting all of this data. And it's not until all the data have been collected, with all of the security and everything else that's put into this, that the code is then broken. And we determine whether or not the particular technology that we're using to detect the presence of spirit reveals their presence. So it's the gold standard in biomedical research is the randomized control trial, the blinded multi-center randomized control trial. Now, the kind of task that we're using is, I just love it. I always get excited when I describe it, because one of the questions that people ask, I say, well, how do you know that it's really the people on the other side that you think it is? So, for example, I will share one of the names. One of our hypothesized post-material participants, collaborators, is the distinguished physicist from the 20th century, Dr. David Bohm. And the question is, well, how do we know it's really David Bohm? So the task that we use is a laboratory version of a personal identification test. It's the same kind of a test that we use when we do online banking. You know, the computer will ask us, well, you know, what's your mother's maiden name? You know, where did you grow up? You know, things that would identify you, that you would know, and most people wouldn't know. So what we do is we create a test that's specific for David, that asks a series of questions that he would know, and half of those questions fit him, and the other half don't. So he can answer yes for half of them and no for the other half of them. And if it's really David who's trying to take the test, not only will David pass the test, because he'll get the correct ones correct and the incorrect ones, he'll say no to the ones that are supposed to be no and yes to the ones that he should be able to be sufficiently accurate so he can, quote, pass the test and also break through to reach the statistical significance. And we have this identification test for each of our hypothesized spirits. So not only does it prove that we can detect our collaborators under these ultra-controlled procedures, but in the process, they've also definitively identified themselves as definitive as any, you know, online personal identification task could be. And the paper that's coming out in the next couple of months describes that method with the preliminary data. And then we've completed large-scale validation studies of this, like for 24 sessions and so on, multiple times. And that paper has now been submitted to a mainstream journal. And our fingers are crossed that, you know, maybe it'll be deemed sufficiently of quality and so on to pass muster and be published. So that's an amazing bar to reach. And for someone like me, who was not raised in a spiritual tradition, as you know, I mean, I was raised in a religious, essentially atheist home. And I was raised in Western science. I mean, it's science that has taken me to spirit. Science has taken me to spirituality. Science has taken me to source, to God, and so on. And when I look at the totality of the data now, I no longer have an excuse to disbelieve. In order for me to have integrity, given the blessing that I've had of being part of so much of this data and literally witnessing it with my own eyes, for the sake of integrity and responsibility, I have to conclude that I'm 99.9% certain as a scientist that all of this and more is real. Now, if I put on my scientist hat, the way I'll frame it, for my colleagues is that the simplest and most parsimonious explanation that accounts for the largest amount of the data is survival of consciousness and personality after physical death, and so on. That's how I would say it when I put my scientist hat on.
Yes.
When I put on my non-scientist lay hat, I say the other side is real, and that I don't have an excuse to disbelieve anymore. And now the goal is to take something that is definitive proof of concept and develop it into definitive proof of practice or a product. So what we're now doing is trying to take something that takes many hours of data collection to establish statistically that spirit is real. So it's like, for example, it might take 25 minutes or more to be able to get a yes or no response because you have to collect so much data with all this averaging. We want to go from 25 minutes to 25 seconds, and ideally just a couple of seconds to get a yes or a no. And if you could do that with 99% certainty, then you have a practical technology for texting, because you can then make a soul keyboard. And once you have a soul keyboard, so that now they can text with us and we can text with them.
Oh, wow.
Now everything changes.
Yeah.
And that's the path that we're on right now.
Whoa. So I have a few questions. When you say soul phone, in Brazil, not only in Brazil, but the spiritists have been talking about transcommunication. That's the same,
Yes.
right?
Historically, the work has been called instrumental transcommunication. And people have been using whatever technology they had available at the time. Radio, television, microphones. People just tried whatever they had and hoped that spirit could somehow learn how to use that technology. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we are beginning with a scientific theoretical framework about the nature of energy and information, bridging from quantum physics through what's called dynamical systems theory. And we're making specific predictions about how a post-material person's info energy body, how it interacts with, for example, attracting electrons. To what extent does our bodies attract electromagnetic fields? We, quote, conduct electricity.
Yeah.
Well, in principle, their bodies should attract electrons and conduct electricity as well, in theory.
Yeah.
It's just that their level is going to be minuscule compared to ours. So what you have to do is you have to build technology that is extraordinarily sensitive on the one hand, and is also extremely effective at filtering out noise. It's called the signal to noise problem or challenge. And then, because we're doing this based on biophysics, ultra weak signal biophysics, it's not like the spirit has to figure out how to make the equipment do anything. All they have to do is use the skills that they already have. So, for example, with the work that I was telling you about, that ultimately led to the randomized control trial research, we're using a very sophisticated application of a piece of technology that is very sensitive and that is actually commercially available, but it's based on the principle that if you make contact with it or you're near it, it attracts electrons. And this is what's called a plasma globe, which uses what's called a Tesla coil. And they're novelty items. I mean, If you touch the outside globe, you'll see the plasma streams being attracted to your finger. And if you don't attach it and you put it into an enclosure, we've shown that with sophisticated averaging, the electrons will still be attracted to your hand, even though you can't tell it by looking at it per se. So just to finish this comment, so what happens if a member of our spirit team takes their info energy hand and places it on top of the globe, or even places it inside the globe? We should be able to pick up a measurable change in the plasma dynamics. And you see, it's not like they're trying to figure out, how do I make the microphone work, or how do I make somehow the radio signal produce a sound that they take hours and hours and hours of them to try to practice, and which they produce for the most part extremely unreliably. Now all they have to do is use their bodies like they normally do, and it's up to the technology to detect their presence. So that's what's different between the historic work and the work that we're doing. It's all driven by the theory and the biophysics. And I think part of the reason why we've been so successful is because we're bridging those two realms.
Oh, wow. So at Kardec's time, in the Medium's book, when he describes his journey, he talks about the fact that he saw that when a medium was present, things would happen, the physical events, right? But
correct.
He described that you needed the presence, whether the medium was conscious about their mediumship or not.
Yes, and we don't need that with the work that we do. They can be there by themselves in the middle of the night, and if they're there, the technology does its work.
Oh.
So it's like a cell phone. It's nobody else has to be present. You can text on your phone without anybody else being present, a medium or psychic or your kids or anybody else. You can just make your movements with the keys and it picks you up. It's the same paradigm, the work that we're doing.
Wow.
All they have to do is know what they have to do, like where is the switch and how do they have to move their hands in order to activate it. And then the rest is completely, quote, automatic.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
I want to ask you a question because, for example, in another book, Heaven and Hell, in which Kardec was describing like cases, his conversations, how he was. And then it's interesting because he says, sometimes he lost the connection. Not he, the medium lost. The spirit was no longer there, so he was incomplete.
Yes.
Back again. Does
absolutely. Very good point. With this system, the electronic devices are replacing the medium.
Yeah.
The difference is our cell phones don't get tired like we do. If you're working with your cell phone, you get tired, you start making errors, then you fall asleep, you can't use it at all. Yeah. So our ability to, quote, work with a keyboard or connect with the spirit very much requires our being in the optimal state. The beauty of the technology is it can be in that optimal state 24/7.
Oh, wow.
So therefore, it eliminates one side of the equation. Spirit still has to be present, and they have to be present in the right way. So they have to still be present, and they still have to be able to follow the instructions. But once they've learned those instructions, the principle is they should be able to use it. At least that's the goal. That's the goal of going beyond requiring us to do so. Now, for the record, some people ask, they say, well, does that mean that mediums will no longer be needed or be unimportant? And the answer is no. Of course, there's no substitute for the direct capacity to connect with someone or something on the other side, okay? But the truth is, you and I couldn't be having this conversation without our technology right now.
Mhm.
And no matter how connected you and I can be intuitively and subjectively, this is a piece of cake for us to do.
Yes.
And it's much harder to do this via, our direct consciousness.
Uh-huh.
So if you're in the physical, which you and I are right now,
Yeah,
it helps to have these tools.
it does. But were you able to see different types of spirits coming? Was there a particular category that was most common?
Well, it's interesting. Right now, we are very limited in only working with very motivated, very high level, committed beings on the other side.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So, but once we develop should we reach the point, and we think we will, just a matter of time and energy and finances, but should we reach the point where we have what we call the breakthrough level, where it goes from proof of concept to proof of practice, then we can address all of those questions.
I see. Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, because I like very much when you describe the potential mechanism behind about the electrons. Because
Well, yes.
Yeah, right? It's very important because we all, in Spiritism, we talk about, the perispirit, the spiritual body, being the means through which we can connect into worlds, because we all have a spiritual body connected to us. Right. And that's how it's possible for us to go from this non-material state to connect to the material state, because we have this common means. And then now the technology mimicking it somewhat.
Yes, that's no pun intended, in spirit, what we try to do.
Yeah. But then I was going to say, given that, if we think about how do they show up? Why these and not others?
Well, okay, that's a great question. First of all, how they show up is just like with mediumship. Meaning, when a post-material person shows up with a medium in a session, forgetting about how they know to show up and why they show up, they appear in a form that can be recognizable to the medium, i.e. they're in physical form, they have a face and so on and so forth, but they also appear in a form that can be recognized by their loved ones. So when the medium says, well, I see this person's kind of short and she's very thin and she has kind of blondish colored hair cut down to here, the reason why you can recognize that as your daughter is because that's what your daughter looked like. So if you're on the other side and you want a medium, you want your loved ones here to be able to recognize you, you want to show up in a form that you are recognizable to them. And all that energy and information is, according to theory, preserved in the vacuum of space, and so you bring that. When I do research with Susie Smith, for example, who physically died when she was just prior to her 90th birthday, sometimes Susie appears as if she's 60. Sometimes she appears as if she's 40. She can appear at different ages. She can look at different ages, like different ages. And she even shows up in paintings or in sculptures at different ages. But they're clearly Susie. And they're not Marilyn Monroe, or they're not, some other person or Princess Diana. She looks like Susie. Now, so they appear in a form that are recognizable to us, and that's very easy for them to do because it is their essence. It's part of their history when they were here. Also, when they appear, and they appear with their spirit body, historical body, that is in terms of its energy and its form, in the same way that the medium can recognize that completeness, and they can wave, they can talk, they can do all the things that they normally do with this body. They then can use this body to interact with our electronic equipment just like we do. Okay. And in our case, because where I'm working with a team of people, we have mediums who invite specific collaborators to work with the equipment at a particular time. We also teach them to, for example, follow instructions on a computer. So if it's David's turn to now be tested, the computer, remember, all of this is computer automated now. The computer will show up on a screen and it'll say, calling David on the screen. There'll be a big slide.
It's like an evocation.
Yes. And the computer audibly says, calling on David. The experiment will begin soon. Calling on David. The experiment will begin soon. So the computer, both audio and visual, tells David, get ready, because now the experiment is beginning for you. And we've been previously taught, working with the mediums, that when he sees that, that means it's his time to work with the equipment. And we do the same thing with the other members of the participants.
Well, recently, last week, I was talking to a friend who is a spiritist, and he works with computers, designing. He works with books for children in spiritism. His name is Luis Rivas. And we were talking on the phone because he was doing the art or design of the Spiritist magazine. And I said, Luis, so many things happen sometimes in 13 years that I've done the magazine. Every time I have to close an issue, it's like 10,000 things happen. He said, Vanessa, I've been working with computers, and he's interested in transcommunication there in Brazil and in Peru, where he's from. And he said, every time when we were in Brazil, and we were working with the Spiritist magazine, for example, sometimes the computers shut down or they crash. So my question to you is, you're working with technology and you depend on technology, but we know how much spirit manifestations also affect it. So how were you affected by it in terms of,
that is such a great, you always ask great questions. Our spirit team is very careful not to hurt the equipment.
Okay.
Wow. Our spirit team are people who have worked with this technology for years, and they know to be careful. And they know, so they're not overloading a system. And they're also not trying to make their presence known except through the sensors and the tasks at hand. In other words, they have to follow a precise set of experimental protocols in order for us to work together. And that's why it's a real collaboration. And we've had very little trouble with, it's funny. The only time that equipment typically doesn't work is if I'm for example, being interviewed for a television show or something, and they bring all this equipment and stuff, and then there's a lot of quote. Remember, I don't see or hear spirit. I'm like Helen Keller. I'm not a medium. One of my colleagues, Dr. Bob Steck, called the Helen Keller of Afterlife research. Anyway, but when there's a large group of spirit present in the room, then noise will show up on the amplifier, in the audio, or we'll have trouble with the.
There's some interference, right?
There's some interference because there's like too many of them, or they're having too good a time, or somebody's playing around just to get noticed, or something like that. But when we're doing our controlled research, we don't have the trouble at all. It's very
Wow.
interesting. It's like they're really careful.
It's so interesting. Yeah, it looks like the other side really is helping so much.
So, one of the things I would love to share, because I'm going to have to go soon,
Sure.
is that to the extent that technology can complement and extend what we can do with our physical bodies. And by the way, I should say that most of the ideas for the development of this technology is coming from the other side, from the team.
Oh, okay.
We consider this to be their intellectual property, not ours.
Oh, wow.
And we protect their intellectual property because imagine we actually have a keyboard, which is the first stage of a cell phone. Before visual, before auditory, a binary keyboard is the simplest way to have communication. Once there's a keyboard, then they can communicate just like we can. There's no difference. They can use computers, they can write manuscripts, they can submit patents, they can do anything because it's just a keyboard. It's just it strains our imagination to think about this. So I don't have to therefore defend them in explaining that this was their intellectual property. It's up to them to do that.
Yeah.
So they will then communicate using the technology, who they are, what they've done, what is theirs, and so on. Then we have the ethical issue of is their spirit friend, okay? And how do we expand? So, you and I get you're excuse me, you are I presume a United States citizen.
Yes.
Okay, as am I. Now let's imagine we have a cell phone, so keyboard.
Okay.
And you and I transition. Yeah. Have we lost our citizenship? Have we now lost our rights when we interact with our loved ones here back on the planet? If, for example, you have an estate, and you want to leave your money to your children or your grandchildren, or you wish to give it to a charity or whatever, but you're not dead anymore. Do you have a right to make sure that the resources that you created when you were here are actually being followed through with the intentions when you left your will? If you were murdered, but you're now on the other side, should you be allowed to be able to testify at your own trial? Because remember, you can now do so with the cell phone. And then you would be cross-examined just like anyone else would be, so that your voice could be heard. Because very often people are killed, but we don't really know details of what happened and so on and so forth. There are so many ethical, moral, legal questions that get raised once the possibility for this kind of communication becomes valid. And also imagine if we were going to create, and we are actively working this through, what you could call an interdimensional cooperation.
Oh, wow.
Between here and there, in order to coordinate and also protect, because you don't want the technology abused, to make sure that the technology is being used for the best and highest good. It requires collaboration on both sides. And then the question becomes, well, how do you build those? How do you develop a corporation which is a legal spiritual corporation? And the answer is, of course, it's all possible. We just have to have the will and the vision and the caring to do it.
Do you think in the next 10 years we're going to get there? We're close. Looks like we're
yes.
close.
Okay, no one's ever asked me that specific question like that. Here's what I would love to say. I would love that 10 years from now, on July 4th, you invite me back Okay, so for the next decade, after we completed the second decade,
All right.
you invite me back. And whether I'm here in the physical
Uh-huh.
or I'm with you in the post-physical, we will have a conversation about this. My prediction is, unless something untoward happens, at least the soul keyboard, at least soul texting will be real within the next year, 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And we think substantially sooner, but it depends on, multiple factors.
The only thing, Dr. Schwartz, as our dear friend Paloma is here saying, is what about there is the ethics on this side, on the other side, it's hard to manage it. What
Right.
about that? Frivolous spirits.
The frivolous spirits or malicious spirits.
Yeah.
As you can probably imagine, I have been concerned with that issue from my very first possibility of considering this. So that is, as Susie Smith, my adopted grandmother, author of 30 books in the field of parapsychology and life after death, warned me, and she passed away in 2001. So we're talking over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
First of all, she said, do not play with Ouija boards. Do not let that. You have to be extremely careful. You have to build in safeguards. That's why, as you know, mediums typically engage in prayer. They have protection on the other side, so on and so forth. And by the way, Susie Smith, was fond of saying that she couldn't wait to die so she could prove that she was still here.
Yeah.
And since Susie passed, which is 2001, she has been one of the most active post-material persons on our team all this time. She's participated in maybe 24 experiments. I've written about her in multiple books. And I also jokingly say she gives new meaning to the phrase, our work is never done. We have been told that partly due to the structure of the universe, i.e. in terms of frequency and stratification, quote, on the other side. And again, this is a hypothesis, ultimately tested. But they claim is that people who are, quote, at a lower frequency, it's much more difficult to sort of raise their frequency to get to a higher level. Whereas people at a higher level, they could drop down and see a lower level.
Yeah.
So if the technology is set to function at a higher level, the frivolous spirits won't have access to it. And they also, that's why it's an interdimensional corporation. They, on the other side, it's their responsibility to make sure that the technology is only available. So in fact, and I didn't make this clear, at least for the foreseeable future, our plan is not, if all of this unfolds, is not, quote, sell keyboards and just let anybody have a keyboard with any spirit. That would create havoc.
Yeah.
What we are doing is having it be more like the early stages of the telephone, where you rented time on a telephone and you had to go through an operator in order to use it. And therefore the appropriate constraints are built in so that you minimize, if not eliminate, potential complications from, quote, frivolous spirits or malevolent spirits or people who would wish to abuse it on either side.
On either side, exactly. Dr. Schwartz, I know you have to go, but I have to ask you a question.
Sure.
All of it, all of your books, all of your experiments, and now the latest ones you've just described, does it change the way you feel about death and going back to the afterlife? Does it change anything for you?
Profoundly.
Mm.
First of all, I do not fear death at all. I have no reason to fear death at all. I am forced to conclude that all of this and more is real. I don't have an excuse not to believe. Okay, it would be a lack of integrity to still doubt. I had to get off the fence of doubt because I was no longer justified in doing so. Otherwise, I'm not being a scientist. You have to discern when is the time to change your mind.
Mm.
So I changed my mind based on the data. And if anything, I can't wait to, quote, transition. So not only can I be with people who I knew on this side, but all these people that I didn't know in the physical that I'm going to be able to meet in the post-physical because they're part of this extended team. So I'm looking forward to a very happy and productive post-material existence. Okay, and it's only because of my feeling that there are things I need to do when I'm here, including being a hopefully a loving husband and being loving to colleagues and so on, and being of service at multiple levels, that I remain in the physical. Now, I'm not looking forward to the process of dying per se, the physical process, because in our society it's not sacred, and we're kinder to our pets than we are to our parents. All right. And all of that, of course, is going to have to change. As Woody Allen said, he's not afraid of death. He just doesn't want to be there when it happens. Okay? So I'm not looking forward to the debilitating, getting old, to being in pain, and all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that is really not necessary for our spiritual development or humanity or whatever. So that's going to have to change. But not only do I take the long view. So, for example, Vanessa, I've had the privilege to know you for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
And with someone like you, which I feel an immediate and instant simpatico with, and respect and admiration, and so on. I would love it if there are things that we could do together for thousands of years. I mean, I don't think when I look at someone, I don't look at them just at this moment, at this plane. I take a, quote, bigger view. And I think that is, quote, not crazy, quite the contrary. It is a rational and logical set of reasonable expectations and predictions to make in light of the evidence. And also it therefore elevates love and caring to an even higher level in my daily life. So I become even more love aware and caring aware, mindful of that.
Yes.
And my hunch is that you're asking me what my personal experiences are. I also know that many people who have had, quote, spiritual awakenings in their own ways, they come to very similar conclusions. I think what's probably more novel for me than most is that all of this has happened to me. I've been taken here through science and through a commitment to truth seeking, and following the data where it leads.
I am honored with the perspective of this multi-millennial work together with you. I'm looking forward to that. I'm already dreaming about it. And I know it's going to happen because there's much to do. And I love when you say seeking the truth, because that's exactly. And I am impressed with the works, like the relentless search for the truth on your end, I know in this country, it's not easy to
No.
research on what we're doing.
No, it's not.
We're so grateful that you are. So count on us.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege. By the way, I should announce that this fall, my newest book will be coming out, which is called Extraordinary Claims Require Extraordinary Evidence, the Science and Ethics of Truth-Seeking and Truth Abuse. And it features the question of life after death, but is much broader than that.
See, Paloma, he's here again. We love it. And please allow us to bring you back when the book is released.
Oh, I would love that.
All right.
I would be honored. I would love that.
So
But
that's
I want you to please put me on for, put me in the schedule for 10 years from now, okay?
Oh, it's already penciled in. And millennia to come. That's a sure thing. Dr. Schwartz, thank you for the treat. It's like this 10th anniversary makes much more sense with you. It's not by chance that when we started Kardec Radio, I was asked by the spirits to invite you. It was through technology that we brought it all together, and now you're researching on this 10 years later. It's like, oh my, the pieces of the puzzle coming together.
Yeah, you're right.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your presence, your work. Count on our prayers. Kardec Radio's audience is here cheering for you, praying for this most important investigation, the investigation of the truth. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many blessings, and thanks to the audience as well. Would you like to say a final comment before we wrap up, Dr. Schwartz?
Only, I think, to your audience, and that is, your audience is blessed to have you and your husband and the team of people so devoted to honoring Kardec and all of that which he envisioned, both in the past and in his present, because I'm sure he is connected and actively, involved. And you're carrying the torch for this, and you're also bridging science and spirituality. And I trust that they appreciate how blessed and fortunate they are that you're in their lives.
Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. It means the world to us, your blessings. We consider you the godfather of Kardec Radio.
Oh, boy. That's a great honor.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much. And I know our audience is here so grateful, saying thank you. Even John DeRose is saying, you're now a spiritist, honorary spiritist. Well, that's what it is. And we hope to see when the book is released. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, friends. Bye-bye.